Okay, we've made some good progress, but at this point, our Rust backend is getting to be a little crazy. It's over 500 lines long, and there's some tauri stuff in here, some trade site stuff in here, some item text parsing, a whole bunch of structs, and it's kind of all just in one big pile. And this is a problem because this is pretty close to the starting point of our app. So if somebody like a coworker or a contributor, or even you, the author, 6 months later, comes back and tries to understand this, this is probably where you'd start. You'd go to main.rs, you'd follow this reference, and you'd end up right here. So ideally, this file would read kind of like a table of contents, and right now it does not. So later on, we'll get really organized with some design patterns, but for now, we're just gonna make two new files, item text and trade site. And at this point, you could ask Claude to move all this stuff into its right place, but the problem with that is that it might move and change things in the same step, and I don't want to have to look out for that. Plus, it's something that might make us a little bit more comfortable and confident with Rust as a programming language. So this is good practice, and it kind of keeps us in the driver's seat. So we'll split this to the right, and the first thing we'll move over is this trade site filter struct, and we'll grab our mapping. And we'll grab this parse item text function. And we don't need this to be async, but we do need it to be public, so we'll change that. And we'll change the function name to be toTradeSiteFilters. And then in here, we'll just call item text toTradeSiteFilters. Cool. We'll also add our imports here, tab complete that. And now we'll move over our trade site file, grab the rest of these structs, drop those in there. Move over this helper function and the search trade site function. This one does need to be async, and it also needs to be public. And same thing, we'll just reference that in here. Fix the imports in this one as well. Save our files. And we don't need these imports anymore, but we do need to import our two new files, and we need to import the structs. And here we've got some errors. Let's check out what that's about. It says field ID of trade site filter is private. And it looks like we get that for a couple different fields. So all we have to do there is come over to this struct and make these public. And all that goes away. We'll go ahead and close these files. And I don't really like redundant comments, so we're going to delete those. And look at that, lib.rs is now less than 30 lines long, and it does kind of read like a table of contents. We've got our tauri setup, and we know that item text parsing stuff is over here, and trade site stuff is over here. And now I feel way more confident that if I had to come back to this in 6 months, I'd have a much easier time figuring out what's going on. And at this point, a sensible thing to do would be to run our app to make sure everything still works, but that seems kind of boring, so we're not going to do that. We are going to make a new checkpoint, and we'll call this one cleaned up lib.rs. Cool. The next item on our agenda is to improve this mapping right here. So this is the mapping of the stats on our item text to the ID that gets sent to the trade site. And Path of Exile has hundreds of these stats, and they change over time. So right now we're providing this statically, but ideally we would be providing this dynamically. And we know that this mapping exists somewhere on the trade site because I can select any one of these stats. And if we look at the network activity for this request, we're going to see this ID is what gets sent to the trade site. So I searched this thing from top to bottom, and what I found was that if you go to Application, Local Storage, and scroll down to Stats, this is an exhaustive mapping of the stat on the item text to the ID that gets sent to the trade site. So now if we clear this storage, come back over to Network, clear this activity, and refresh this page, we'll see a handful of requests get made to populate that data. And if we click on Stats, and response, here we go. This is the stat that we see on the item text, and then the ID that gets sent to the trade site. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to copy this, save it for later, come back over to headers, note the request method and the URL, and we're going to use this to ask Claude to integrate this into our trade tool. Okay, time to make this prompt. We'll say, we need a more extensive way to map item text stats to trade site IDs, and also let's include the specific reference to where that's happening right now. I found a request we can make to get a full mapping dynamically. Make sure to account for rune stats differently than explicit stats since they're different categories in the mapping. Let's pass the mapping into toTradeSiteFilters as a dependency. And trait site logic should be in trait_site.rs and consistent with how we interact with the trait site in other requests. And finally, we'll ask for one more thing. We'll say, let's also make a unit test for 2 trait site filters to make sure our parsing logic continues to work for the filters that we support. Run the test with cargo test to make sure it passes and use the following item text as an input. And now we'll also include the request URL, the request method, and the response. Let's see what Claude comes up with. And it's review time. Let's start with lib.rs, and we can see that we're grabbing those mappings and passing them into this function as a dependency. Exactly what we asked for. Perfect. This isn't totally ideal because this means that every time we parse some item text, we'll be fetching these mappings over and over, but we'll address that later. A couple other things. I don't like these redundant comments, so we're going to delete those. And I think that this reads a little bit better if we prefix it with our trait site file name. Nice. Next, let's look at itemtext.rs. And here we can see we're importing the stat mapping struct, blowing away the old mapping, passing it into our 2 trait site filters function. And our parsing hasn't changed that much. We can see that we're handling rune stats and explicit stats separately, which is great. And the fact that we have a passing test means that we don't have to scrutinize this too closely. And right here, I want to fix something real quick. This is something that I noticed the last time we ran our app. I noticed that for stat filters, the name and the value are the same thing, and it looks kind of goofy to show them side by side like that. So I'm going to change the name to instead either be rune stat or explicit stat, depending on what kind it is. And here's our test. So first off, we set up like a fake mapping that just includes the stats that we care about. And then we pass in the item text and that fake mapping into our 2 trait site filters function. And we make sure that all of the filters that come out the other end are what we would expect. So why do we make this test? 3 reasons. First reason is that up until now, we were making sure this part of the app works by manually running our app, pasting this item text in, and then verifying with our eyeballs that the right filters showed up. I get sick of doing that pretty fast, and so this automates that. Let's make sure it works. We'll go into the tauri folder and run cargo test. And here you can see that it found and ran our test, and the green OK means that it passed. So if I were to change one of these values to something else that we don't expect on the filter and run the test again, now we see it failed. Missing rune lightning resistance filter. So now we can see that something is broken without having to check manually. Cool. Second reason we made this test is it gives us coverage. Basically, if there's a bug somewhere in our app, running this test is going to give us an idea of where that bug could possibly be. So the more coverage you have, the fewer places that bugs can hide from you. And now if you or a coworker or a contributor breaks this part of the app, you're a lot more likely to notice. The third reason we made this test is that this is a tool that can give our AI assistant more context. So before we talked about how Claude can't see our running app and the values of things like item text, filters, queries, stuff like that, but Claude knows how to run a test. So this is a way that it can see what happens when our app is running. Okay, last file to review, trait_site.rs. And we've got some new structs based on the response data that we provided. Looks good. Here's our request URL. We can see that it's a GET. And we do a little bit of parsing before we return those mappings. And this part down here surprised me. So we're in our build trade query function, and previously we were only processing stat filters that began with explicit. So that means we were ignoring stat filters that start with rune. And I knew about this bug and I was saving it because I wanted to use it to illustrate how test coverage can help us narrow down where a bug is. We're going to notice the bug, realize that our test passing means that the bug must be after we create our filters, but Claude noticed and fixed this without us even asking. So I'm a little annoyed that I don't get to use the bug to illustrate a point, but I gotta admit, I'm also kind of impressed. It's kind of cool that it found and fixed this. So let's run our app real quick. We'll put in our item text, scroll down a bit. And this looks much better. So now let's say, show me boots with lightning res as a rune stat, movement speed as an explicit stat, and we'll take these other filters off. And this is looking good. We've got lightning resistance as a rune stat, movement speed as an explicit stat. Cool, looks good. And now we'll make another checkpoint. We'll call it fetch stat ID mappings. Nice. Next up, let's set up our hotkey. I've got our original design here where we hover over an item in the game, press the hotkey, convert the item details into a list of trait site filters, and then pop up the front end with the filters. We skipped the hotkey in our prototype because we wanted to build this up incrementally, and the hotkey was kind of a lot of complexity up front, but now we're ready for it. So brief little recap. If we hover over an item in Path of Exile and press Ctrl+C, the item text for that item gets put on the clipboard. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this hotkey stuff in more detail. The user hovers over an item, presses the hotkey, and then we're going to simulate a Control-C keystroke. That's going to put the item text on the clipboard, so we'll read the clipboard, and then we'll parse the item text the same way we have been, pop up the front end, show those filters. But there is a problem with this design. The user might already have something on their clipboard, and if they do, we're going to clobber that. But that's an easy fix. We'll just read the original clipboard contents, save that off to the side, send our Control-C, read the clipboard with the item text, restore the original clipboard contents, parse the item text, pop up the front end, display the filters. Nice. So here I'm looking at the tauri docs for global shortcut and clipboard, and they've got these really awesome examples that we can use. So you could just give your AI assistant this link or ask it to find documentation, but I found that nothing beats just copy pasting a solid example directly into the prompt. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to copy this one in, and for the clipboard docs, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to copy this in. Okay, let's do this prompt. Let's use a hotkey to kick off our trade tool with the following flow. Step 1, user hovers over an item in Path of Exile 2. Step 2, user presses the Control-D hotkey. Step 3, user's clipboard contents are saved. Step 4, Control-C keystroke is sent to Windows. Step 5, item text is read from the user's clipboard. Step 6, user's original clipboard contents are restored. Step 7, item text is parsed with our toTradeSite filters function. And step 8, our app window is popped up with the filters. And we'll also say we won't need the item text input in page.svelte anymore. And our hotkey implementation should follow this exact example from the tauri v2 docs. And our clipboard implementation should follow this exact example from the tauri v2 docs. And let's go. All right, let's check this out. Starting with lib.rs, we've got some new imports. And here's how we're sending a Control-C. So it looks like we got some keyboard events. Press Control, press C, release Control. Makes sense. Then we've got config not Windows. And it says for non-Windows platforms, we'll just wait a moment. We're not doing that. And we've also got our old parse item text tauri command. I don't think we need this anymore. It was tied to the item text input box on the front end, and now we're using the hotkey. So I'm going to snip this too. Here's our new handle hotkey function. So we back up the clipboard, send the Control-C, wait a sec, read the item text from the clipboard, make sure it's not empty, restore the old item text, parse the item text, pop up the front end, return the filters. Nice. And I don't mind having these step-by-step comments in a long function like this, but the inconsistent step numbers are kind of throwing me off, so we're going to get rid of those. And here's where we're setting up our new hotkey. This looks really similar to the official docs, and that's what we asked for, so that's great. And it looks like we send either the filters or an error to the front end. Cool. Down here, we got rid of this parse item text command, so we'll delete that. And I don't think handle hotkey flow actually needs to be a tauri command either. If you remember a while ago, we looked at this and it said, creates a handler that allows commands to be called from JavaScript with invoke. We're not doing that with handle hotkey flow. We're actually calling it from the backend directly. So we'll snip that as well. And we'll remove this command annotation. I think Claude just got confused. So lib.rs is looking a little bit crazy again. I don't feel like cleaning it up right now, but I promise we will come back and clean this up later. And next up, page.svelte. Now we've got a TypeScript struct, great. And sure enough, here we can see that parse item text function being removed, the one that was using invoke. And instead we got two new listeners. One's listening for filters and one's listening for an error. Looks like Claude also fixed some TypeScript errors, love that. Here's the item text input box being removed. So here, if we're waiting for the hotkey to be pressed, we show some instructions. And if the hotkey does get pressed, we render the rest of the form. So it looks like the form didn't actually change that much. It just got scooted forward a little bit because of the if statement. And we've got a button to reset the form now. Cool. And the rest of this is just style stuff. So now we'll look at the tauri configuration file. I don't know why I messed with this, but while we're in here, we might as well change it up a little bit. So for product name, we'll call this chiseled course. Identifier, we'll do chiseledcourse.makestuffwithme.com. And I changed the size of our window as well as the title. So again, we'll call this the Make Stuff With Me chiseled course. And we'll have to see how this new size looks. And finally, we'll look at our cargo file. These all look good, but this review wouldn't be complete without Claude trying to sneak some garbage in. I don't know what WinCon is, and I don't remember seeing it anywhere, so we're just going to get rid of that. And now we try it out. Oh, look at how huge it is. I have no idea why I changed that. Anyway, these instructions are kind of nice. So now let's pull up PoE2. So we'll hover over these boots, press the hotkey, and it works. So this is pretty cool. We don't have a whole lot of bells and whistles, but the features that we do have, in my opinion, are the heart of a trade tool. You can get to it without tabbing out of the game. We support a bunch of filters, including a bunch of stats dynamically, and we search the trade site for live results. We still need to clean it up a bit and we need to deploy it, but this is a huge milestone. So let's make another checkpoint and we'll call it hotkey done. Nice.